You're downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
RZIM is privileged to have 40-some speakers placed in about a dozen-plus countries globally. One of the great thrills I have is working alongside these wonderful voices. I think a unique one and a highly blessed one, an influential one in our team is Jill Caratini. I still remember the day she walked into our office for the first time several years ago. And what a bright light she has been. She has inspired my own life, and watching her grow and blossom into a powerful writer has truly been a thrill. Her recent studies at Duke have only enriched her. Her desire to bridge the gospel with artistic expression is a powerfully relevant approach in our time.
One of the reasons why I so love the arts and find it of value to the ministry of apologetics and evangelism around the world is that it really does help us embody the story a bit more, to involve our senses in what we're saying about truth. So it's very easy to make truth statements and have them kept almost abstract or only in our minds. But the arts really do help us bring them back down, to live with them and try them out. And that is exactly what Jesus wants us to do.
This ministry is growing so drastically and so dramatically, but so pointedly, and we need you to stand with us and be enablers for us. Please ask the Lord what he would have you to do to stand with RZIM at this time. We'll be grateful, and on behalf of our entire worldwide team, this is Ravi Zacharias saying thank you so much. The new Hinduism encourages a search within oneself to achieve harmony with the forces of change in the modern world. The inner search is attractive to many today, to fall into the flow of things, to get into touch with the process of growth, to sense a harmony with divine energy which works beneath the more visible forces of change in the world is an inviting alternative to struggling with moral choices. It gives them a backdoor for escape, and that's why I say the New Age movement is nothing more than an attempt at mitigating the bankruptcy of secularism with the spurious glitter of Eastern mysticism.
When you think about the religion of Hinduism, what images come to mind? Do you imagine faraway people in faraway places like India? You don't immediately think of Hollywood or pop music or the American universities, do you? And yet some of the most basic Hindu beliefs are now a regular part of popular entertainment and higher education. Hello and welcome to Let My People Think with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. Today we begin a series dealing with New Age philosophy and Eastern religion. Ravi looks specifically at Hinduism. What do Hindus believe? Where do we see reflections of Hinduism in our culture? How can a Christian reach out to a Hindu? Here's Ravi with a message entitled The Spurious Glitter of Pantheism.
I was speaking in London, England, and I met a young Muslim gentleman who came to know the Lord when I had delivered an address there in June of the same year. And this was the first time I was meeting him after his conversion. I had spoken at a banquet where I addressed the theme, The Journey of a Skeptic, and there were over 50 Muslims in that audience of 175 people, including a relative of the Shah of Iran who was at our table and came to know the Lord that night. This young man was one of those who talked to me after the meeting, and he was struggling with the decision that night. He said, I'm not ready yet, but I have really been moved in my heart and mind by what you've said. I've got a lot of questions that need to be sorted out. And by the time I went back 6 months later, a Muslim convert friend of mine had helped him to get those questions sorted out, and he had made his commitment to Jesus Christ. His name was Shahzad. Now, after the meeting was over Sunday morning in London, he met me in the aisle there, and he talked to me for several moments. And one of the things he said to me has stayed with me in my mind. He said, my brother Ravi, he said, I have really had an awful lot of emotional struggle after my conversion. No intellectual struggle. He said, I really believe that my commitment to Christ is an intelligent one. I believe the Bible to be the Word of God. I believe Christ is the person I was really looking for. But I have really had an emotional struggle. And he says the emotional struggle lies in the fact that I am the only one in my family who is a Christian, and I have a great deal of affection for my father. I just cannot bring myself into believing that my father was wrong. And he said, can I ask you one question? My father paid my way for me to get my MBA, he said, and I have just received that degree. Do you think it would be wrong for me to go to his grave and bury my MBA degree with him as a sign of my respect and gratitude to him? Now that tells you an awful lot, doesn't it? I wonder how many of us here in the matrix of Western civilization would ever think that something like that would be an expression of respect and adulation for a father. But you see, what he was really saying to me was, I'm torn. I feel a sense of betrayal. It is as though I have done something that would immensely grieve him. That's one thought I want you to bear in mind. I mentioned that to you because, remember, and I'm with you, I can see why we are facing the struggles we are right now. I can see that there's a demagogue out there. If he's not somehow contained, the whole world will be turned into an inferno sooner or later. But sometimes it is easy to forget that behind numbers and machines are maybe some men and women struggling under the moonlit nights, wondering what life is all about. And when we talk to a Hindu or a Muslim or a Buddhist, it is very easy to put a distance between them and us and think of them in terms of all kinds of philosophical platitudes and forget their allegiances and what they're really struggling with within their hearts. When you study the history of cultures, there are basically three types of cultures that philosophers of cultural studies talk about, and I want to introduce you to them. The first is what they call a heteronomous culture. A heteronomous culture. And when we talk about heteronomous, it comes from the Greek word meaning heteros, meaning different. Let me explain this term for you. When we are talking about a heteronomous culture, we are talking about a culture that lives at two levels. One is the level of authority, the other is the level of the masses that follow that authority. So if you're looking, for example, at a political illustration, Marxism would be a heteronomous culture, because the handful in the government are the controlling body at the top, and the masses in the mainstream just listen to the decisions that are made at that level. Religiously speaking, Islam is a heteronomous culture. Why? Because the mullahs and the ayatollahs and the leaders form the policy. The hadith, the traditions come from the past. The sunnah, which the Sunnis in Islam, which means the customs of Muhammad, that also comes from a different level. So what I'm saying to you is the masses are moving along a mainstream in this way, and their authority for what is right and what is wrong comes from a level different to theirs. In secular philosophy, Marxism is an illustration. In religious worldviews, Islam is an illustration of heteronomy. That is one type of culture. There is a second type of culture which is called an autonomous culture, and in this case there is no distinguishing level from top to below. Each person operates independently, autonomously in his own way. An illustration shouldn't be hard to find. You're sitting in a society that is an autonomous culture. When we live in the western part of the world, particularly in the United States, we are not compelled for our worldview to look to somebody else. We have total autonomy and total freedom. This is an autonomous culture. And in some ways, many religions also, Protestantism in distinction to Catholicism. Whereas in Catholicism, there was the priesthood level in a heteronomy to the masses who had to listen to them. In Protestantism, it was not the abolition of the priesthood, it was the abolition of the laity. We all became priests having direct access to God. And with that comes a certain degree of autonomy. So you see, that's the second kind of culture. Now notice I have not put Hinduism in either of those. There is no heteronomy and authority from above. There is no autonomy where you can do whatever you want on your own. Hinduism, along with Buddhism, are probably the two classic religions in the world today which can be rightly described as a theonomous culture. and a theonomous, theos coming from the Greek word for God. Now please follow me. The assumption in a theonomous culture is this, that the level of infusion of the reality of God is equal at the highest level as there is at the lowest level, in the sense that when the higher level ever directs the lower level, they don't see themselves in disjunction to each other. They see themselves as moving in a common whole. So that an average Hindu does not see himself as being told what he should do from above. The entire Hindu culture is seeped in this religion. You follow what I'm saying? There is an undergirding, a belief that we are all believing the same things, so that when a decision is made at a government level or at a religious level, they see it as an expression of a Hinduism. The common phrase there is dharti ke admi. We are people of the soil. And one of the best-known goddesses in India is Kali, the earth goddess, as it were. The goddess of destruction is what she was known as. But Hinduism is a theonomous culture. Now, if you can bear in mind, therefore, these three definitions, and now listen to this. Careful, please. Religion is the essence of culture. Culture is the dress of religion. Religion is the essence of culture, and culture is the dress of religion. Which means, when you are talking to an Indian, you cannot separate his culture from his religion. So when you ask an Indian to be converted, in effect, you are giving him the challenge to turn his back upon many things that he considers culturally essential to his life. See, if you were to make a response to Christ, if you're not a Christian and you're a Westerner, you would not see yourself in any way betraying your culture. But if you were to talk to a Hindu about it, he would immediately see it as some kind of betrayal. One of my Hindu friends in India, when I went back to see him years after I left India and lived in the West, and went back and he talked to me, he said, "What do you do now?" He said, you've become a religious man, you've become a preacher? I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you know, you have lost," his words were, "you have lost your originality. You are no longer one of us," is really what he was trying to say. Have they somehow deceived you in that part of the world? Now you understand why. When immigration takes on an extraordinary level, when a Hindu comes in or a Muslim comes in or a Buddhist comes in, patriotism is the farthest thing from their mind, because their allegiance is to a culture, not so much to a nation. We've got some professors of religion who say when you got the pluralism in America, you end up with a kind of a stew, a potato and a carrot and a turnip and the meat, all of that in the sauce, and each ingredient retains its own flavor, says the illustrator, and America's like a stew. I got news for him. What works with a potato and a carrot does not work with a human being. See, there are going to be some contradictions and challenges that will come along the way. And so when we talk of ourselves as a nation which is intentionally pluralistic, bear in mind there are people within the framework of a culture who will never surrender their essential culture, of which religion is an integral part. And Hinduism, of course, has that indistinguishability in that particular setting. Now, what I would like to do is give you what are the essential beliefs of Hinduism without necessarily going into all of their philosophical writings and so on. If you can get a handle on these ideas, you'll begin to see where they're coming from. And then when I close, I would like to demonstrate for you where it is today and why it has such an attraction for the Westerner. I have not seen this kind of material really put together solidly in writing, and I myself am presenting it for the first time to you as we tie it all together, so please bear with me as I unfold it. There are several motifs in Hinduism. The first one is this: all of life is unity. All of life is unity. Every form of life is united to other forms of life. This is where the ideas of vegetarianism and non-violence, etc. come in, so that there is a connection between all forms of life. And the average Hindu you talk to, this is an non-negotiable for him. Every living thing has that in common with the divine, and the distinguishing from a living to a non-living thing is only a difference in degree, not in kind. It's only a difference in degree, not in kind. In fact, when the founder of Jainism, that's the religion in India where you'll see the Jains wearing even masks on their mouth and nose so that they do not ingest or inhale any insects, which is part of life. They don't want to create that hiatus in unity. Mahavira, who founded Jainism, would not even cook vegetables in his home. And the reason he didn't is because even vegetables were a form of life. So you say, how did he sustain himself? Well, everybody who believes such extremes of philosophies have to find back doors of escape. And so what he would do is he would go begging, and if you in your home had any vegetables left over from what you'd cooked for yourself, then he would take it, so that this way you had not annihilated life for his sake. It was already there and dead. You find all kinds of tremendous maneuverings that will go on. Even my professor at Cambridge, when I'd suddenly sometimes throw a question his way after he'd made a dogmatic statement on Hinduism of some sort, he'd sort of, with a curl in his lip and a twinkle in his eye, say, you know the answer to that. He says, we have our ways. We have our ways of saying something dogmatically and accommodating it under the table in some other way. So all life is unity. That is number one. Number two, every birth is a rebirth. Every birth is a rebirth. In other words, the doctrine of reincarnation is absolutely non-negotiable to a Hindu. There are many doctrines a Hindu will be willing to trade away with you in some liberal form. The doctrine he will never negotiate with, this is one of them. There are two that I have never met a Hindu trade off. One is the doctrine of reincarnation. In fact, I was speaking at one of India's leading universities in the city of Agra. That's the city of the Taj Mahal. And there were about 400 people there, and I think only about 10 or 12 Christians. And my wife was in the audience, and I was going to be giving a presentation, and the vice chancellor of the university, who was a Hindu, was going to challenge me after that. He was sitting on my right hand. This had never been done in that setting as far as anyone could remember. And I remember when I was sitting at that table about to begin my presentation, I lifted my glass of water to take a drink, and my hand was trembling with such fear and nervousness, I couldn't get that cup up to my mouth. I was petrified. There were Muslim scholars in the front row, Sikh scholars in the second, and the rest of them were all Hindu scholars. And at the end of it, in a rather shocking euphemism, my wife says to me, you looked a little nervous to me there this afternoon. And as soon as I finished my address, a Hindu scholar stood up, and his first question was, what is your opinion on reincarnation and karma? No Hindu will negotiate these two, because he immediately knew by my answer to that would separate me from that audience, because both the Buddhists and the Hindus have a rebirth dogma and a karmic dogma. The Muslims, of course, would have been separated at that point, but the Hindus and Buddhists would immediately identify with that. So number one, all life is unity. Number two, every birth is a rebirth. And this doctrine of reincarnation, in fact, is getting very, very popular even in the Western part of the world. And by the way, just in case you and I take these things lightly, some of the finest minds in America's scientific world, and I'll explain to you why, lean towards pantheism. Possibly even Einstein was a pantheist. Fritjof Capra, who wrote the book The Tao of Physics, pantheist. So what I'm saying to you is not some kind of nonsense that you and I think we're spending our time on. Some of the finest minds will build themselves on some of these philosophical issues that I'm talking to you about. So all life is unity, every birth is a rebirth, and the doctrine of karma is a non-negotiable for them. Number four, the human condition is misery and opportunity. The human condition is misery and opportunity. One of my favorite Hindi songs, sung in a Mother India film, this is the way it went. Duniya mein hum aaye hain to jeena hi padega, jeevan hai agar zahar to peena hi padega. Which literally means, since I have come into this world, I have to live. If living means drinking poison, I gotta drink it. So it is that wheel of rebirth. Sometimes you'll crest, sometimes you'll be smothered by it. If you want to read a classic book on Indian fatalism, read the book City of Joy. Some of you may have seen that. It is written, I think, by Collins, the man who co-authored along with Lapierre and Collins, O Jerusalem, Is Paris Burning, Freedom at Midnight, that great trilogy, one on India, one on France, one on Israel, and this one, City of Joy. He will make a case for you that even people living in the wildest slums and the filthiest slums of Calcutta have that sense of joy, delivered from this misery, seeing life as an opportunity. That's Hindu philosophy. They see that inescapable condition, as it were. Number 5, the goal of all of this is what they will call Atman. I'll explain that term, Siddhi, which literally means, please hear me now, when a Hindu philosopher uses the word Atman, he means yourself, your essential self. And this is what he will say. That which is essentially you needs to be liberated into total peace, and that is the goal of life. You've heard this illustration, haven't you? When the sage looks at the student and says, when the student says to him, who am I? And the sage says to him, what do you see there? And he says, I see a tree. And then he says to the student, what do you see on the tree? He says, I see branches. What else do you see? I see fruit. Bring me that fruit. Break the fruit open. What do you see in there? I see some pulp and I see some seeds. Take out the seed. What do you see when you smash the seed? And he smashes the seed and opens it, and he says, I see nothing. And the famous line that he gave the student was, Tat Tvam Asi. Thou art that. The essential you is that intangible, just like out of this invisible essence of a seed comes this gigantic oak tree. So there's an invisible essence in you that makes you into this cosmic scene of one reality. Marvelous illustrations just flow out of there, and you can sit and nod your head there for hours, and at the end of it walk out and say, did I really learn anything? But the philosophizing goes on. Atman Siddhi, number 5. Number 6, there are techniques provided for them, and you are familiar with them. The one that is most popular in the West is the technique of yoga. And there are basically 3 ways you can find this Atman Siddhi. One who is pursuing Atman Siddhi by way of philosophy. One who is pursuing Atman Siddhi by way of devotion and ritual purification before the gods. And the third is Karma Yoga, which is a discipline of life that you bring to do your best and not worry about the consequences, but you just are doing the good deeds that you can do. Every Hindu basically falls into one of these 3 categories. Please listen now. That's why some of them can be theists following devotion. Listen now. Some of them can be atheists or non-theists following knowledge. You can take the Hindu scriptures and prove almost anything you want to prove from them. It is a mixture. It moves from polytheism, many gods, to monism, where you're part of a non-personal absolute reality, all the way down to a kind of a theism where one God is selected whom you give your personal devotion to. But these are the 3 ways in which the techniques are provided. All right? That is 6 there. Number 7, this becomes clear to us as Christians move along. Every person is free to choose his own. Every person is free to choose his own. So if you go to an Orthodox Hindu and say, wait a minute, I'm a Christian. How does this measure out with you? 9 times out of 10 he will say, since that's the way you were born, it is your destiny in this life to live it out this way. But you can be sure this is not the last time around for you. Because this is not the ultimate expression of moksha or release. So somebody like Shankara or a Radha Krishnan would say, look, even though you are a devoted Christian, keep following that way to the best, but this is not the final stage. When you come to our stage, you will no longer be following a personal God. You will know that you are identical with the divine, part of the Brahman, the impersonal absolute. Now, please listen. Because in that philosophy of life, you are part of the divine. Notice now, there is no I-you distinction. That's why the pure monistic Hindu will not pray, because praying assumes a you. When I pray, I'm talking to somebody, I, you. They only have a capital I, they meditate. That's where the meditation comes in. The more you look inside, the more you will find out that you are identical with the divine. And of course, when you come to the last part, it'll tell you anything faithfully followed will lead you to the ultimate realization. Anything faithfully followed.
There's a lot to Hinduism that we need to learn if we are to effectively witness to those following that faith. You've been listening to Ravi Zacharias and his message, The Spurious Glitter of Pantheism. If you'd like to order a copy of this message in its entirety, call us at 1-800-448-6766. You can also order online at www.rzim.org. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010. I hope you can join us next week as Ravi discusses why Hinduism appeals to its followers and how it's affected the Western world. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.